Yemen has entered the war not with a press release, not with a symbolic gesture, but with a direct, kinetic military action that has fundamentally altered the strategic landscape. On the morning of October 19th, Houthi forces, backed by Iran, successfully targeted and struck multiple commercial vessels in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, effectively closing one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. This single move, a calculated escalation by the Ansar Allah movement, has transformed a contained regional conflict into a multi-front crisis with immediate and severe consequences for global trade, energy security, and the geopolitical balance of power. According to maritime security firm Ambri, at least 3 major commercial vessels were struck by drone and missile fire within a 48-hour period, forcing all major shipping lines to suspend transit through the Red Sea corridor. The U.S. Central Command confirmed the attacks, stating, "These illegal actions pose a direct threat to the freedom of navigation, international commerce, and regional security." Here's what you need to understand about the Bab el-Mandeb. This narrow strait, just 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, is the southern gateway to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. It is the conduit for nearly 12% of global seaborne trade, including an estimated 8.8 million barrels of oil per day. When the Houthis close it, they aren't just attacking ships, they are squeezing the carotid artery of the global economy. The immediate impact was a 4% spike in Brent crude oil prices, with analysts from Goldman Sachs warning that a prolonged closure could push prices above $150 per barrel. The risk premium is no longer theoretical, said Halima Croft, managing director at RBC Capital Markets. We are now in a scenario where a key transit route is actively contested by a non-state actor. Now let's talk about the trap. For months, the United States has been pouring military and diplomatic resources into the eastern Mediterranean, deploying 2 carrier strike groups to deter Hezbollah and reassure Israel. The entire American strategic posture was oriented north. The Pentagon's playbook was written for a conventional, state-on-state escalation. Yemen's entry blows that playbook apart. The Houthis operate on a doctrine of asymmetric warfare, where a $20,000 drone can force a $3 million interceptor missile to be fired. They don't need to win a naval battle. They just need to make the cost of passage prohibitively high. And they have a strategic depth provided by Iran that makes them incredibly difficult to deter. So what does this mean on the ground? Shipping giants Maersk, MSC, and CGM have all issued directives for their vessels to avoid the Red Sea, rerouting around the Cape of Good Hope. This adds approximately 10 to 14 days to transit times between Asia and Europe, increasing fuel costs by $1 million, threatening to disrupt supply chains just as the global economy shows signs of fragility. The Port of Singapore Authority reported a 15% drop in projected arrivals for the next fortnight, while Egyptian officials at the Suez Canal Authority are facing the grim prospect of a catastrophic loss in transit fees, a primary source of foreign currency. The Biden administration's response has been rhetorically strong, but operationally constrained. A senior Pentagon official, speaking on background, stated, "We are evaluating all options to ensure freedom of navigation and hold those responsible accountable. But the options are all bad. A direct military strike on Houthi positions in Yemen risks a full-scale regional war and could pull Saudi Arabia and the UAE back into a conflict they desperately want to exit. Doing nothing allows an Iranian proxy to control a global choke point with impunity. It is the definition of a strategic dilemma. This is the moment where the war's geometry shifts from a localized conflict to a global stress test. The Houthi action is not an isolated event. It is a deliberate, coordinated move within Iran's axis of resistance strategy. By opening this southern front, Iran forces the United States and its allies to split their attention and resources, stretching their military and diplomatic bandwidth to a breaking point. It exposes the fundamental vulnerability of a globalized economic system that depends on narrow waterways remaining open. So you think the Houthis are just a bunch of rebels with some old rifles? Think again. For the past 7 years, they've been running the most brutal, live-fire military training exercise imaginable. And their sparring partner was a $700 billion Saudi military, bankrolled and armed by the United States. The result? A battle-hardened, innovative force that has now turned its entire arsenal on shipping lanes. The question isn't if they can disrupt trade, they already are. The real question is, can the US military, built for big, expensive fights, actually stop them? Let's break down the report card. Since 2015, a coalition led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates launched a devastating campaign to crush the Houthis. The coalition had total air dominance and cutting-edge American and European weaponry. The Houthis had mountains, grit, and a steady supply chain from Iran. What happened next was a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. The Houthis didn't just survive, they evolved. They learned to intercept and reverse engineer missiles. They built vast networks of tunnels and storage facilities, making their military infrastructure virtually immune to aerial bombardment. Most importantly, they developed a deep and sophisticated arsenal of drones and missiles. Here's the POV shift you need to understand. The Saudi war wasn't a defeat for the Houthis. It was a 7-year R&D project. Every Saudi Patriot missile battery, costing millions per launch, was a test case. Every airstrike that failed to decapitate their leadership was a lesson in dispersion and concealment. They have transformed from a militia into a hybrid force with the capabilities of a state army, said Dr. Theodore Karasik. Their drone and missile programs in particular are no longer makeshift. They are systematic, deployed, and proven in combat against one of the most technologically advanced militaries in the region. Now, look at the inventory. We're not talking about a few rusty scuds. According to a December 2023 report from CSIS, the Houthi arsenal includes anti-ship cruise missiles like the Iranian-designed Quds and ASAF missiles, with precision guidance, ballistic missiles, including the Birkin and QAR series, some with ranges sufficient to threaten targets across the Bab el-Mandeb. Unmanned aerial vehicles, from low-cost, explosive-laden Samad drones to more advanced Shahed-style loitering. Munitions. These are the game changers. A Samad drone can be produced for roughly $20,000. The SM-2 or ESSM missile fired from a US destroyer to shoot it down between $2 million and $10 million. This is the core of the trap. The Houthis don't need to sink a US carrier, though hitting the USS Connie shows they can try. They just need to create an unsustainable economic equation. It's the ultimate gaslighting of modern naval power, forcing a superpower to bankrupt itself, defending against toys. Every time a Houthi drone or missile is launched, the US Navy has to make a multi-million-dollar decision. Let it through and risk a catastrophic hit on a commercial vessel or warship, shoot it down and watch the defense budget literally evaporate into thin air. The cost-exchange ratio is so lopsided it becomes economic warfare. You're not just defending ships, you're defending a principle, and the ledger for that principle is written entirely in red ink. And let's be clear about their strategic depth. This isn't an isolated cell. It's a front line of the Iranian axis. Intelligence analysts consistently report that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps provides technical expertise, components, and targeting intelligence. The Houthis are the willing, capable proxy, but the playbook and the logistical tail lead back to Tehran. This means their supply of missiles and drones is not a finite stockpile. It's a replenishing pipeline. You can intercept 95%, and they keep firing. For the past 25 years, while the United States was focused on the deserts of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been methodically preparing its homeland for a different war. This is not a contingency plan. It is a national project of fortification, weaponization, and strategic patience designed for a single purpose: to make the cost of an American or Israeli attack so catastrophic. According to a 2023 assessment by the IISS, Iran now possesses the largest and most diverse missile arsenal in the Middle East, with an estimated 3,000 ballistic and cruise missiles. The strategy is built on three pillars of asymmetric power. First, the missile force. U.S. intelligence reports detail networks of underground production facilities and launch sites hardened against airstrikes. These are not just Scud derivatives. They include the Sengio medium-range ballistic missile, the Khordad third-generation surface-to-air system, and the Samar land attack cruise missile. Their missile program is their central deterrent, said Fabian Hintz. It is a strategic-level weapon system designed for retaliation, and its scale and dispersion make a disabling first strike virtually impossible. Second, the drone swarms. Iran has moved from being an importer to an exporter. Its Shahid 136 loitering munitions, now infamous in Ukraine, represent a doctrine of saturation. A 2022 report noted that Iran's drone program is designed for mass, low-cost, and attributable attacks to overwhelm defenses. These systems are produced across a decentralized network of civilian and military factories, making the supply chain resilient. The POV from a U.S. Central Command planner is bleak. You can't bomb what you can't find, and they can build more faster than you can destroy them. Third, and most critically, the geography. Iran is a fortress of mountains, with vast tunnel complexes known as city bases dug deep into the ranges. Satellite imagery analysis has shown extensive excavation activity near key military and nuclear sites for over a decade. These are not mere bunkers. They are interconnected facilities for command, control, weapons storage, and missile assembly. Think of it as a honeycomb built inside a mountain, a former UN weapons inspector told us. You seal one entrance and the entire network remains operational. An invasion force would have to fight tunnel to tunnel. This 25-year preparation creates a specific, brutal battlefield calculus. It is the ultimate gaslighting of American military supremacy, inviting a superpower to fight on terrain meticulously, engineered to negate its greatest advantages. Every fortified base is a current demanding to see the manager, knowing the manager has no receipt and no way to win the argument. The Iranian strategy is to protract the conflict and bleed the adversary, and leverage the global economic chaos that would follow, namely the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 21% of global daily oil consumption passes. So, we arrive at the cliffhanger question: what happens if the U.S., driven by escalation or a catastrophic event, commits ground forces to this prepared battlefield? We are not talking about airstrikes or special operations raids. We are talking about divisions. The moment American boots touch Iranian soil with hostile intent, the 25-year plan shifts from deterrence to execution. The missile arsenals fire not just at troops but at regional oil infrastructure and U.S. bases. The drone swarms target logistics, airfields, and naval vessels in the Gulf. The United States is now facing coordinated military pressure across three distinct fronts in the Middle East. A multi-theater strain, simultaneous low-intensity conflicts with Iranian-backed forces in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen are creating an unsustainable operational tempo for U.S. Central Command, forcing costly defensive postures and diverting critical assets from the primary strategic focus. In the north, Hezbollah maintains a daily artillery and missile duel with Israel, pinning down U.S. carrier groups. To the east, a coalition of Iraqi militias has conducted over 180 attacks on U.S. bases. Pentagon officials confirm these attacks have resulted in dozens of American casualties and constant force protection alerts, degrading unit readiness. Every rocket intercepted is a missile not available for another contingency. A former officer told us, The southern front represents the most severe and direct economic warfare. Yemen's Houthi movement continues its blockade of the Red Sea, targeting commercial shipping with drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles. U.S. forces have been engaged daily. Internal Navy estimates indicate that standard missile interceptors used for these defenses cost approximately $4 million per unit, while the Houthi drones cost a fraction of that. We are spending a king's ransom to swat drones. The math doesn't work. It's a strategy of economic exhaustion, and it's working. This tri-front pressure has triggered the first major publicly acknowledged U.S. strategic losses. In late January, the U.S. withdrew the USS Gerald R. Ford, leading a capability gap. Furthermore, the U.S. has begun a negotiated withdrawal of troops from several bases in Iraq. The redeployment from al-Taf and other outposts is a tactical retreat forced by strategic overextension. The cumulative effect is a military posture stuck in reactive defense. Resources allocated for a potential high-end conflict are being drained by a persistent, low-cost harassment campaign across thousands of miles. The cliffhanger question becomes undeniable. What were these first major strategic losses, and what does their precedent signal for American power in the region? The Pentagon's worst-case scenario for asymmetric warfare became a grim reality in the early hours of February 15th, when a coordinated Iranian drone and missile attack across 3 theaters resulted in the first confirmed loss of a U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry and a KC-135 Stratotanker, according to 3 U.S. defense officials. The strike, which occurred over international waters near the Strait of Hormuz, exposed a critical vulnerability in American force projection and revealed the unsustainable economic logic of its regional missile defense strategy. U.S. Central Command confirmed a hostile engagement resulted in the loss of 1 E-3 airborne warning and control system aircraft and 1 KC-135 aerial refueling aircraft. All crew members are listed as missing. The attack was a sophisticated multi-axis operation. While U.S. and allied naval assets were distracted intercepting volleys of Houthi and Hezbollah missiles, a separate flight of lower-flying Iranian drones and cruise missiles targeted the support aircraft. They identified the soft underbelly of our air campaign, the tankers and the eyes in the sky, and they went for it, a retired Air Force colonel told us. This is a massive degradation of our operational picture. The financial asymmetry of the engagement is staggering. An E-3 Sentry costs approximately $330 million, while a KC-135 costs around $40 million. And the Iranian drones cost $50,000. We just traded nearly $400 million in irreplaceable platforms for what was likely a few $1 million worth of Iranian hardware. A Pentagon budget analyst said, "This is the cost exchange problem." The loss compounds an already crippling missile defense expenditure. Navy expenditure reports show that the cost of interceptors used to defend against Houthi and Hezbollah attacks has exceeded $1.2 billion since October. We are burning through a finite stockpile of multi-million-dollar interceptors to stop drones that cost less than a used car, the budget analyst added. The defense industrial base cannot produce these missiles fast enough. This strategic erosion creates an impossible dilemma for any potential U.S. escalation. You cannot conduct a sustained air campaign over Iran without tankers, and you cannot fight effectively without AWACS. They are the brain and bloodstream. The precedent set is clear. America's technological shield has been pierced, and the economic foundation of its defensive posture is collapsing. This forces a fundamental reassessment of strategic options, narrowing the field to choices considered unthinkable. The mountains of Iran, already fortified over decades, now guard an even deadlier secret. A demonstrated capability to strike the very pillars of U.S. air dominance. A ground invasion, military planners concede, would be a trap. The Zagros and Alborz mountain ranges are not just geological features, but the foundational pillars of a national defense strategy. Iran has constructed an extensive network of underground facilities known as passive defense sites. These are not mere bunkers but hardened cities designed for command, control, weapons storage, and population survivability, rendering traditional aerial bombardment campaigns largely ineffective. You cannot destroy what you cannot see or reach. This geological fortress enables Iran's doctrine of asymmetric warfare. Military analysts estimate that over 70% of Iran's critical missile and drone production infrastructure is now located in these subterranean complexes. The strategy is a porcupine defense. Think about the operational nightmare, the former planner explained. You have to secure mountain passes, clear thousands of fortified tunnels, and do it all while under constant attack from mobile missile launchers and drone swarms. The implications for any potential U.S. military action are severe, with forward-deployed forces in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. The U.S. military posture in the region is predominantly expeditionary and reliant on vulnerable supply lines. A 2022 War Dame concluded that Iranian missiles launched from concealed mountain sites could effectively target and disrupt every major U.S. airbase and port facility in the Persian Gulf within the first hours of conflict. Our bases are fixed targets. Their launchers are mobile and hidden, a U.S. Army colonel stationed in Kuwait said. They have spent 30 years building a kill chain designed to isolate and strangle our forces. U.S. Central Command war plans have long grappled with the anti-access area denial bubble Iran has erected. The plan involves layered defenses, coastal anti-ship missiles, drones to overwhelm air defenses, and proxy forces to attack supply routes. The goal is not to defeat the U.S. military in a head-to-head fight. The goal is to make the cost of sustaining operations so astronomically high that Washington is forced to withdraw. It is a strategy of exhaustion. The final, haunting question for Pentagon planners is one of geographic isolation. With the Strait of Hormuz potentially closed and land routes vulnerable, the tens of thousands of U.S. troops in Kuwait could find themselves in a cul-de-sac. The map tells a story, the former Pentagon planner said. Forces in Kuwait are at the end of a very narrow logistical finger. If Iran can sever that finger at the wrist, then those forces are potentially besieged. So today I want to talk about the economic endgame. Because while everyone is watching the missiles in the mountains, the real weapon is being loaded right now. And it's not in a silo, it's in a spreadsheet. The strategic calculus for Iran and its axis isn't about winning a battlefield victory. It's about driving the global price of oil to $200 a barrel and watching the political will of America shatter. This is a play for the pocketbook, and the target is the American voter. Right now, the Persian Gulf region accounts for nearly 21 million barrels of oil per day, about 21% of global supply. The Strait of Hormuz sees 1/5 of the world's oil shipments. The threat isn't just to close it, that's the nuclear option. The threat is to create a perpetual risk premium that traders and markets price in. Larry Fink stated that a sustained disruption in the Gulf could see oil prices potentially testing $200. Here's what you need to understand. This is gaslighting on a geopolitical scale. The goal is to make the U.S. and its allies pay for the war at the pump, in their inflation numbers and in their stock portfolios. They don't need to sink a supertanker. They just need to create the perception Yemeni forces threatening the al-Mandeb, Hezbollah's potential to strike Mediterranean energy infrastructure, Iraqi militias able to disrupt pipelines. It's a coordinated squeeze play from multiple angles. This is about overwhelming the system's capacity to absorb shocks. A 2023 study modeled a scenario where Persian Gulf flows are reduced by 4 to 5 million barrels per day. The model projected U.S. gasoline prices rising by 60 to 80%, tipping the economy into recession. This brings us to the breaking point: political will. A Reuters Ipsos poll found that 60% of Americans now oppose deepening military involvement in the Middle East, with the cost of living cited as the top concern. The White House is caught in a trap. Every dollar spent on missile defense in the Gulf is a dollar not spent to addressing domestic issues. The adversary knows this. They are trading missiles for political leverage. So the haunting question for Washington isn't just about besieged troops in Kuwait. It's about a besieged economy and a besieged presidency. How long can the political cost be sustained when the economic bill arrives on every kitchen table? So here's the brutal reality check. The populations of Iran and Yemen, hardened by decades of sanctions and war, possess a societal resilience that makes a conventional military victory for the United States a logistical and political impossibility. This isn't about defeating armies. It's about breaking the will of civilizations that have been in a perpetual state of resistance for a generation. And the American playbook has no chapter for that. You cannot sanction or bomb a society into surrender when its foundational myth is survival against external enemies, explains Dr. Anahita Masani. The resistance economy isn't just policy here. It's a lived reality for millions. Now, layer on Yemen. 9 years of a Saudi-led coalition bombardment failed to dislodge the Houthi movement from power. Instead, it forced a generation of fighters and a civilian population inured to hardship most Americans cannot conceptualize. A 2023 survey found that 78% of respondents in Houthi-controlled areas believed their ability to withstand hardship was greater than or equal to that of the Saudi-led coalition. When your baseline is survival, conflict loses power. This creates a catastrophic cost-benefit asymmetry for Washington. The U.S. military is designed for high-intensity, short-duration conflicts. Its political system is built on the expectation of measurable progress and an exit strategy. Neither framework functions here. Our electoral cycles are 4 years. Their strategic cycles are measured in decades, says Colonel John Spencer. We think in terms of battle space. They think in terms of societal endurance. They have a much higher pain tolerance. Despite severe economic hardship, polling from Iran shows support for the government's forward defense strategy remains consistently above 60%. In Yemen, Houthi legitimacy is inextricably tied to their confrontation with Saudi Arabia and the United States. For these governments, conflict with the West isn't a liability. It's a core source of political capital, says Emil Hokaim. The more Washington threatens, the more it validates their narrative of a nation under siege. This brings us to the haunting final question. Is the core Iranian strategy to bleed the empire through 1,000 cuts already succeeding? U.S. defense expenditures for Middle East operations have exceeded initial allocations by 40%. Recruitment for units slated for rotation into the Gulf theater is down 15% year over year. And that poll showing 60% of Americans oppose deeper involvement among voters under 35, that number jumps to 73%. The objective was never to win a tank battle against the U.S. Fifth Fleet, concludes a European intelligence assessment. The objective was to make the sustained cost of American hegemony exceed its perceived benefit. A new analysis from the IISS concludes that the United States is facing a forced military and strategic withdrawal from the Middle East within the next 18 months, as the spiraling costs have decisively outweighed the value. This impending recalibration signals the most significant contraction of American power in the region since the 2011 withdrawal from Iraq. According to the IISS assessment, U.S. defense expenditure for operations countering Iran will exceed $283 billion, a figure 62% higher than pre-conflict baselines and unsustainable without supplemental wartime appropriations from a deeply divided Congress. The math no longer works, states a senior European diplomat briefed on the findings. The mechanism forcing this retreat is not a single military defeat, but a death by 1,000 financial and political cuts. Pentagon data shows the daily cost of defending regional assets now averages $240 million. Meanwhile, the closure of critical maritime chokepoints has triggered a 47% increase in global shipping insurance premiums, injecting inflationary pressure into the U.S. economy. This is the bleeding strategy executed to perfection, says Dr. Amina Al-Said. The objective was to make every single day of American presence unbearably expensive, and to ensure those costs were felt by the American taxpayer and consumer. That box has been checked. Politically, the pathway for disengagement is being drafted. Sources indicate a framework, referred to as Ordered Drawdown Gulf, is under review. The plan would involve a phased reduction of carrier strike group presence and the consolidation of ground forces into a smaller number of hubs. The debate has shifted from if to how, and how fast. A former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense told this analysis, "The mission of regional dominance is being quietly retired. The new mission statement is managed stability. The consequences of this retrenchment will fundamentally reshape the regional order." U.S. security guarantees to Gulf states, once considered ironclad, are now viewed as conditional and finite. This has accelerated a frantic diversification of alliances. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are finalizing comprehensive strategic partnership agreements with China that include security cooperation clauses and pursuing détente with Iran. The Gulf capitals are not waiting for a farewell letter, said Emil Hokeyen. They are operating on the assumption that the American security umbrella is folding. The entire architecture of the post-1991 U.S.-led order is being dismantled in real time. For Iran, the withdrawal represents the validation of a theory. The strategic patience of the Islamic Republic has proven to be a more potent weapon than any conventional army, the IISS report notes. With the U.S. footprint diminished, Iran is poised to emerge as the region's paramount power. However, analysts warn this new hegemony will be contested and unstable, likely triggering a volatile period of intra-regional competition as Turkey, Israel, and a resurgent Arab bloc vie for influence in the vacuum. The final, haunting question for Washington is no longer about tactics or timelines, but about legacy and global perception. What does this forced retreat signal about the future of American hegemony itself?